right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Full Observability from Push to Production. Our presenter today is Pierre Tessier, a sales engineer for Honeycomb, and he'll be joined later on by Kostas Kapolonis, DevOps evangelist for Codefresh. Today, Pierre will help you make informed decisions, spending less time fixing and more time improving with the help of observability. But first, I want to go over a couple housekeeping notes before we get started. We encourage your questions throughout the session. Just remember to please submit them using the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar rather than in the chat so we can keep better track of them. And then we will address all of your questions at the end of the presentation. This session is being recorded and a link will be sent to you by tomorrow with the recording and the slide deck. So don't worry if you have to miss some of the presentation. Lastly, please remember to reference codefresh.io/events for all of our upcoming webinars, as we have fresh and informative webinars for you several times a month. So with that, I will hand it over to Pierre to kick off the presentation. Hi, Pierre.
Karen, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about doing full observability, going from push into production. My name, I am Pierre Tessier. I'm a sales engineer over at Honeycomb, but please don't let the sales engineering title fool you. I really am an engineer. I love to dabble in code, do a lot of home things here as well. And I'm all about understanding observability and helping others get it as well. And with me, I am joined by Kostas, who I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself.
Hey everybody, so I'm Kostis. I'm a developer advocate for Codefresh. But before I joined Codefresh, I was also a Java developer for 10 years. So I have seen some of the pains of continuous delivery and continuous deployment firsthand. And I think Codefresh is one of the few solutions that can help you with this.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, let's get started here. And I promise I'm just going to show a couple slides. We're going to spend a lot of time going over products, showing some examples and how we can help make everybody's lives better. But let's talk about why we're here. And the reason why we're even in this session together is it's really the journey of what has happened with everything we've gotten. And as we continue to build better systems, as we continue to adopt these methodologies which allow us to build faster and more rapid, we're also introducing a lot of complexity all the way throughout. So modern systems are great. They allow us to be very agile. We could write quick little fixes and deploy them, but all these things increase complexity and it's harder and harder to understand. It's harder to troubleshoot. It's harder to just know what is going on inside. So as we went from easy to get started, now we went to SaaS. Now you've got dependencies on a SaaS vendor. We went from virtual machines into containers. Now you got to orchestrate this all, and it's kind of Kubernetes. And then I'm sure a lot of people, you either love or you hate, or you both Kubernetes. And even the applications themselves went from monoliths into distributed systems, and we've got all these microservices everywhere. Connecting them all and understanding the dependencies between services is equally as important. So when something happens, it's hard to understand where it's happening. Now, when we talk about going from that complex journey into elite software development teams, what makes a team elite? What makes the engineering of organization ABC software company better than another? And there's been a lot of studies done on this, and I'm going to cite the Doris State of the DevOps report. And really, it comes down to those who can adapt and who build and do it a lot, right? Those who deploy multiple times per day on demand. Something happened, you're not scared to go out, fix a code, and hit that button and have it show up in production a few minutes later. Their lead time for changes are typically less than an hour. They don't need to go through a major change management to make this happen. And because they have the right tooling, because they have the right observability and the right understanding of what is going on inside of those applications, their time to restore is typically less than an hour as well. So when they find an issue and they understand what it is, their time to that resolution is much better than others. And importantly, as well as their failure rate from changes is also very, very low because it's automated, because it's understood, because it's observed, because we understand and we could see what's going on inside of them. So Honeycomb, you know, we might call this the honeycomb difference. Why honeycomb? Try to break it down really into 4 different kind of categories, if you will, or 4 different kind of key differentiators that really make us up. First one is about our real-time exploration. The way that you can iterate and create that core analysis loop, we call it, where you can ask a question and take the answers from your question and use those to ask another question, and doing this in real time on that raw data. Honeycomb has built-in SLOs, built-in error budgeting. It's part of the platform. As these systems get very complicated, we might get, you know, for lack of a better term, really kind of trigger happy. We're going to go off and we're going to create a lot of these alerts. We're going to create a lot of known things. And next thing you know, we're inundated with noise. Systems going bad, systems about to enter improper states. Managing to an SLO and understanding whether or not you are burning through that agreement you've made with your customers being internal or external, and managing towards that, managing towards ensuring you're not changing your business outcomes, allows you to not worry about the noise and only focus on what matters. And Honeycomb does this built into the product, and we're happy to dive into that in greater detail with you as well, to help your organization learn how error budgeting and SLOs can help you be better. Our way of curating and collaboration is equally important inside of Honeycomb. We're not just a tool, we're a tool for your team. We're a tool for you to understand how your team is using the tool, as well as to work as a team to be better together. And ultimately, we have a lot of functionality around allowing you to see how your colleagues are using the tool, and to, you know, piggyback or maybe look over their shoulder and learn what they're doing as well. And finally, probably the biggest one in them all, you know, why is Honeycomb so great? It's really our back end. It's the data store. It's the ability to have unlimited cardinality on thousands of dimensions with queries coming back in blazing fast speeds. It's the ability to not care about the type of data you're throwing at the system, but being able to see every single one of those individual data points never aggregated for you. It's a super efficient data store. Now with that, you know, I'm done talking about Honeycomb. I want to talk a little bit about Codefresh. I'm going to let Kostas go ahead and cover this aspect here, and then we're going to jump in and show you guys some great stuff.
Yes, so today in the demo, you will see Codefresh and Honeycomb together. Codefresh, if you're not familiar with it, is a CI/CD solution, but unlike other CI solutions, it's specifically focused on microservices, Docker, containers, and Kubernetes. While most other CI solutions were, you know, generic, and they were working for virtual machines, and when Docker and Kubernetes appeared, they had to adapt. For us, things were different. We believed right from the beginning that Docker should be central to a CI solution. And this is how we have designed Codefresh. We also have great integrations for Kubernetes. And at the moment, we are one of the few solutions, if not the only one, where you open a Codefresh account, and by default, you also get a Helm repository for free right away. And you get special graphical dashboards where you can look at your Helm releases, your cluster, but for Helm applications. We give you also a Helm pipeline step out of the box right away that you can use to deploy or to store your charts. So if you're migrating at the moment to Kubernetes and Helm, Codefresh is one of the best solutions out there. Another good aspect that I want to discuss, and then here you can go to the next slide, is how you can extend Codefresh. So again, if you're familiar with other, you know, CI solutions, if you want to extend the pipeline, you need to write a plugin. And most of the times you're forced to learn something new. So maybe you need to be a Java or Groovy developer and learn to create a plugin, or maybe you need to write TypeScript and write something that is completely, you know, specific to the CI solution that you're working with. And it's not, let's say, optimal. Maybe you work in a team where everybody's a Python developer and you don't want to learn Groovy. So with Codefresh, we have done something different because we believe that, you know, Docker knowledge is something that everybody should have in 2020. Extending a Codefresh pipeline is as simple as creating a Docker image. That's it. If you know how to create a Docker image, you know how to create a Codefresh plugin, because a Codefresh plugin is a Docker image. So what you see in the screenshot is the marketplace of Codefresh. So these are some of the plugins that we offer that we believe they are, let's say, approved and that are recommended. But every public or private Docker image can be also a plugin in a Codefresh pipeline. This means that all the Docker Hub images that there are right now, and there are a lot, can be used in a Codefresh pipeline. And you will actually see this in the demo today. So Pierre has created a plugin for Honeycomb, and the plugin is just a standard Docker image. There is nothing, specific to Codefresh about it. He didn't have to learn any strange Codefresh API and any strange way to test the plugin. So for us, this is important because it gives freedom to developers to extend their pipelines in the most easiest way possible. So learn once how Docker images are created, learn about Docker files, and you are instantly an expert on Codefresh plugins as well. That's it.
Yeah, I want to come back and mention how easy it was to actually build that one step in a pipeline, and we're going to see that in action as well. And I want to come back in a second about the Helm and the Kubernetes support within Codefresh. It is absolutely really easy to use, set up, and putting together what we're about to show you here in this demo was actually wasn't very hard to do using Codefresh. So starting off with that, right? It is demo time, so let's go off and put this presentation away for now, and start off. We're going to show an application called Hot Rod. You could find it on my GitHub, puck/hot rod repo, and this repo is sorry, I'm going to go to it right here. So this repo, it came originally from the examples that is part of something known as Jaeger. So for those not familiar with what Jaeger is, it is a distributed tracing open source framework. It comes with SDKs and a bunch of other pieces for you, but it's an open source way for you to instrument your code. It's one of a lot of different tools out there. Honeycomb, we definitely support this way of getting data into the platform through something known as the Open Telemetry Collector. This is a Golang application. It's got 4 services put inside of there, all built into a single Go binary. You're free to download it. There is also a load generator inside of here, and even a Helm chart that we use to push this off that Codefresh actually leverages and takes advantage of. So you're free to actually play with this. And what you get when you do put this together and run it is you'll get something that looks like this. Simple app. It's called Hot Rides on Demand, or Hot Rod. And it's a way where you would click on one of these buttons here, like say Tom's Chocolatier, and it'll go off and go find that data for you. It'll go find a ride for you. And it's all very kind of synthetic on what it's doing behind the scenes. And I'm going to go ahead and click this a few more times to make sure we actually generate some data for it. Now at the same time, we are running a load generator on this application as well, so we can generate some data for this demo. And we did something on purpose. We broke the app, right? So let's go look at what this app kind of looks like inside of Honeycomb. And here it is right here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page to bring it to the front end. Let's get into the right screen there. And what we have here is the last kind of 8 hours of data going against this Hot Rod application, if you will. We can see number of requests coming in. It's kind of looks like a decent heartbeat looking kind of style right there. We see a latency graph over here as well. We aren't generating any errors. That's good. Nothing coming back to the front end, at least, or errors going back to the end user. Might be some stuff internally, but nothing from an overall perspective. Now we're going to go ahead and let's dig in more onto this latency chart, because that's usually where we're most interested on. And we're going to enter in latency here. And we're going to kind of look around and just see what is going on. Now, I am looking at the last 8 hours of data. I'm going to narrow my view down to maybe just the last 30 minutes so we can focus in on now. And this is Honeycomb. This allows you to view the data. And the reason why I'm coming in to focus in more on a 30-minute view is because I wanted to bring it down to a 5-second granularity. Every single one of these points is only 5 seconds wide. In Honeycomb, we're always dealing with the raw data. Everything we do is against the raw data. If we go down to 10 minutes, we'll see 1 second wide. So each one of those points is one or more pieces of data, and we continue to drill down and query against that raw data in hyper speed. Now, We were just clicking on, I think it was Trom. So I'm going to go ahead and add a filter for Trom just so we can see that data. I think it was customer, and say starts with Trom's chocolate ears. And I'm not even sure how you spell it. So we're just going to do that right there. And I do that, and there it is. Those are my queries that I was doing against them, taking about between 800 and 900 milliseconds each. And that is certainly what we've seen coming out on this page right here. I got one there about 1,000, but you get the point. Now, I can go ahead and click on each and every one of those individual ones, and we're going to get the distributed tracing view of what just happened. This is really powerful in Honeycomb. It's not where you're going in and you're writing a query and you're getting a list of potential traces with a total round trip time. You're trying to figure out which one to go in. We allow you to get in there to a graphical view. When you're looking at a chart, you click on any point in that chart, and if there's a trace behind it, we'll render that trace for you. Now, inside of this, you get all kinds of good information. This is the classic waterfall chart for distributed tracing. You click on the individual spans right here. Like say we want to look at this SQL statement right here itself. And over on the right-hand side, we'll tell you all kinds of different information about what happened there. First, I could see how this span works into the context of the rest. But more so, we continue to look, we could even get down to the actual query that was run and sent to the database. So if this was abnormally long, we could maybe diagnose it from this aspect as well. And there's more information in here. You can continue to look through this and try to learn more from what you want to do. I'm going to come back to this view. We're going to actually take off this query right here, and we're going to look at all that data again, because there was an interesting pattern with this data. It kind of looks like I've got two bands going on. And we're hearing reports, we have an issue. People are not experiencing that great experience. And although the majority of our traffic, denoted by these darker blue boxes, is down here in our respectful time frame, we do have quite a few pieces of data that are spending over 2 seconds and even over 3 seconds in some cases before they get a response. And that's concerning to us. Now, Honeycomb, being the analytic engine it is, being able to churn through millions and even billions of records at unlimited cardinality to find information, it's great, but it's even better when you don't have to know what you're looking for. So we've got something we know as Bubble Up. What Bubble Up allows me to do is it allows me to identify visually the data that I care about, and it'll go through and tell me what's different about that data. So I could go ahead and say, hey, grab everything here that's over that 2-second window there and just select it all. And it'll go through all the data points inside my selection and compare it to everything it sees, every single column, every single field, every single result, and we'll try to render what it came back with. And we effectively give you below that your results in a baseline selection comparison. So my selection is represented by these gold bars and the baseline is blue bars. And really quickly, I see customer dimension, and I've got value walking, and my bicycle's green, each of them representing about 50% of that load that are problematic. And my baseline, they're really in the low percentages, and I don't even see anybody else in there. Same thing for customer ID, which makes sense. And our URLs contain the customer inside of them, so that makes sense as well. So we're getting somewhere. It's not the client ID, it's not the client itself or the UUID for the individual host. It's literally customer. I didn't have to go out there and say, draw this or group this by customer, although I'm going to in a couple seconds. But it is a way for me to understand my data better. So knowing I found something inside of Honeycomb, just click on it. And we're going to present you with a bunch of options. We do this in context wherever you are in the platform. When you're looking at your query results and you're looking, you see a name, you see a field, you see a dimension, you click on that, even when you're in the tracing view, and we're going to provide you a set of options that you can use to further refine that query you did. This is about something we call the core analysis loop. It allows you to kind of look through your data to continue to answer questions, and you can always back up as well if you get too far in. So I'm going to go ahead and group by customer right here. Now when I do that, and I go to my results tab down here, we see a grouping of every single customer. And when I hover over them, we're going to also highlight the points in the chart above, no matter what kind of visualization you're using that represents that group. So clearly I see value walking and bicycle greens are up there. But when I get to my other customers, they're all in the lower band. So I found something. It's pretty obvious here. It's something with these two customers that's going on. We can continue to look what is going on with them. Why are they much higher? And go ahead and just click on any of them and go back into that trace view. So now when I come to this trace view, I could see that this SQL statement here is taking 2.381. So that's a pretty long time. So maybe this to me is interesting. Maybe I want to understand more about the SQL statements, and continuing that journey, we could say, hey, why don't you group on every single SQL statement that you send into the platform and see which ones take up the most time. So we could say group by that. Let's change some visuals here a little bit. Let's go ahead and add a medium on the duration. And we're going to do it just for the ones that actually have a query inside. So we're going to get rid of that heat map now. We're just going to go with some lines, but we're going to do this by query. And really fast, we kind of get a pattern that develops. A lot of things down low, and again, those same two customer queries kind of floating up top, causing me a lot of pain. So with this, we've kind of formed a hypothesis that we have a problem with those two big customers. And certainly enough, I can assure you there is an if statement in the code that is looking for those two customers and doing just that. But I didn't have to know that beforehand. I just went through and asked questions of my data, and it came back and it answered it for me. And no matter where I was in the platform, when I seen results, I clicked on it and I continued that journey to further refine what I just did. So I can fix this, and we're going to fix this. But before we do that, let's dive into what Codefresh is going to do when I do that fix, when I commit that fix itself. So this is the Codefresh platform. It's really handy. I love this platform for helping you build your build pipelines. I'm a Kubernetes junkie myself. I actually run Kubernetes in my home. And you know, I love playing with it. So when I came to play with Codefresh and I seen how tight it was integrated with Kubernetes, I pointed to an EKS cluster and boom, right away, it provided me everything I needed to know about that cluster going on. It was very easy to use. But its Helm support is really fantastic as well. And we could get into this one, but they offer all kinds of different ways for you to integrate with Helm inside of your platform. I've been doing a lot of builds working with Codefresh, and it keeps track of every single image I've done. But not only every image, but I could get information about every single one of these. You could understand the actual layers that are done to put into that image. No more guessing, did the build work? Did we set this up right? Did we build out our pipeline properly? You can really investigate every aspect of what happened with those binaries and artifacts you're actually creating for your app. So it's really handy in that regards there. But ultimately, what we're trying to do with all this is we're trying to build pipelines. We're trying to get our app out there and have it working. And this right here is the hot rod pipeline that we built. It's got a handy workflow. And when I built this, when I sat down and I said, okay, we're going to go build the pipeline for this app, I just came through the marketplace and I just started dragging and dropping things on here. So I had to build a Docker image, and this will build and push the Docker image for me. It provides a couple different examples for you to use, and whether you're doing this through Google Build or doing it yourself, right? And I can say I'm doing it this way. Maybe YAML scares you a little bit. Okay, that's fine. I get that. Go into the form view and just answer all the questions like this. Same thing. Even allows you to offer additional options, you know, the image name, build arguments, tags, all that stuff, kind of all built in, easy to use. And when you're ready, you hit copy step, and then you're going to paste it inside of here. And it's just that simple. Off to the races, right? And once this is all built up, and once we have the pipelines given in, we just give it a trigger. And in my case, a trigger is a push commit to my repo in GitHub. And then as soon as I do that, it'll go ahead and kick off this pipeline, and it'll do what it needs to do. And you have all kinds of different triggers you can use, and you can have multiple of them as well. So now that we know all this, we understand that we can get data into a pipeline, and we can build it, and we can look at seeing how to use it. Let's go actually and go play with that a little bit itself. So over here, I've got some code. It's our actual application itself. I've already wrote the fix. It was a simple configuration change, but I did want to kind of spend some time a little bit to go over what this app is and how we get all the data in there. So it is using an SDK, and that SDK emits tracing data. And really all we need to do is get a handle onto the current context, and we could append to it. Now, distributed tracing SDKs, whether you're using the ones from OpenTelemetry or Jaeger, they typically come with a lot of auto instrumentation help for you. So they're going to automatically wrap all your HTTP calls, your database calls, and those kinds of things. You get that context for free. It's all brought in. It lives inside your code, and it'll emit the data as you do your operations in an asynchronous fashion, so as to not block what you're doing. But you could go ahead and augment all of that for you. And this is what we're doing exactly right here. So these are called spans. So we're going to go ahead and get a handle on the first span. Go get that span right away. And once we have that span from the current context, okay, we go ahead and give it a tag. In this case here, we gave it a tag called client, and we give another tag down here called customer ID. Later on in code, there's other spots where we add the customer name. The URL gets automatically appended to us because we're wrapping our HTTP calls. SQL statements get automatically added because we're wrapping our database calls for you. So this is all kind of nice and handy, but with just a couple more lines, you could further enrich your data. And that's something we'd love to talk about at Honeycomb. Enrich that data. Send us everything you have. Send us user IDs, customer IDs, and don't worry about that cardinality, because you don't know what you need to know until you need to know it. And it's really important to do that kind of stuff. So with that, I did write my fix. It's right here, ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and say fix silly bug for customers. And we're going to commit that. And I'm going to go ahead and push this down here to master. And as soon as my push happens, now that we're done, we're going to go back inside of Codefresh and let's go look at our pipeline. And literally that fast, I've got a new pipeline pending to run. It's about to kick off. It's in progress. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And what's happening here is that it's building out, it's initializing what we need for our pipeline. And I may have, sorry, I feel like I'm losing my internet here because this rendering is taking awfully slow on my screen. Just going to refresh this real fast.
Maybe you can go to one of the previous builds to show the final result, and then we can wait for it.
Sure. So what happened when we do a build? It'll go ahead and initialize the our container platform within Codefresh itself. And this is a container platform because every single step in a build, like Kostas mentioned earlier, is a container. And this is a great spot about it. So it's going to go ahead and do a git clone. It just runs a container that does a git clone and throws into a volume. And then we do a compile step, which goes ahead and builds out all the steps we needed to compile our code. And it further goes down a list. And next we build and we push the image. And then we get into the deploy stage of our pipeline. And what happens here is first thing is we run a simple container that contains a small little CLI. We're going to get down to what this actual container is in a little bit, that sends something to Honeycomb. It says, put a marker on it. Why do we do that here? Because this is the point right before we're going to start affecting production. And it's going to draw a marker inside. Next is the Helm deploy. This is where production gets affected. It's going to do some churn. Some containers are going to come online. New, old containers are going to come offline. It will do a standard Helm upgrade here, so we're not going to do anything destructive. You're not going to be without capacity for a while, right? And then finally, when the deployment in Helm is done and completed, we're going to come back and we're going to close that marker in Honeycomb. This is important because what happens when we do this is the marker shows up first as a line, and then when we close it, it'll show up as a window. And this allows you to understand if there was any churn that happened. And that's your deployment window. And after you do your deployment, you should see the fix take place. So let's go back and check up on that pipeline again. Come over here. There it is. It actually did complete, did all the steps for us there while we talked about it. And I'm going to go back to Honeycomb, and we're going to set this to we're going to go back actually to our home screen over here. We're going to set this to a 10-minute view just so we can really see that window. And you can see it happened right there. Now, more so is we included a link inside of our deployment marker. So I can go ahead and click on that name, and it's going to come back to the exact same pipeline in that same view we were just looking at. So you can go back and really understand, was this the right build? You can go look at the actual commit itself, which will link you to the GitHub code that took care of this. But it all ties it all back together for you. Now, when we come back to Honeycomb, and I go back to my view over here on that chart, you can see here's my deployment window. We had a little bit of churn that happened, and after we were finished to deploy, smooth sailing, no more problems. And we can continue to run this to get more live data every time we rerun it. And we can see that we really did fix the problem inside of our application. So let's talk a little bit about, what it is that we had to do to make this happen, make this deploy marker happen inside of Codefresh. So inside of our pipeline itself, we're going to go look at the workflow for it. It was pretty simple. We had an image right here that we created. That image included, it's a simple Docker file. We'll show it to you in a few minutes. And it just included an executable in there called Honeymarker, as well as JQ to parse the output from Honeymarker. We went ahead and ran our command, which is kind of contained right inside of here, which will go ahead and it'll go and create the marker itself, and it returns an ID, and then we export that ID. So you can see here, this is kind of like you're running bash script inside of a container to really help you get what you need. Later on, after our deployment step, we go ahead and run Honeymarker one more time, but this time here, we're going to actually update our marker with an end date. And all these URL and all these parameters are available for you as well, like Honey API key and Honey dataset. They were defined over here inside of my variable pipeline. All the other ones, like the CF build, those are passed down for you, and I created extra variables through the export command. So to kind of tie all this together, we have a Docker image, again, right here. It's called Honeymarker, and the Docker image itself just looks like this, right? It's just a Docker file. Comes from JQ. We add the Honeymarker binary to it, and we're done. And then we go ahead and we Docker push this off, and it's available as a step inside of Codefresh. And that's how you build steps in Codefresh. But the marketplace itself is quite rich for you as well. And you could further refine these steps to do multiple things for you. So we can make it all a big, huge plugin if we wanted to as well. I don't know if you wanted to add anything here as well, Kostas, about building out steps and making plugins inside of Codefresh to enable.
Yeah, I want to add, this is a good summary, that this idea, the idea that Docker images are just your steps, also means that they are isolated. So in other CI platforms, when you want to install a plugin, you have maybe to install it centrally. And then after you install it, you also need to check if it's compliant with the other plugins that you already have. And then when another team, let's say, wants to upgrade the plugin, you need to coordinate between teams and ask everybody, do you want to use the new version, the old version, or how should we do this? Now with Codefresh, if all you have is Docker images, this means that every time your pipeline is running, it dynamically runs the Docker images of your plugins. And then as soon as the pipeline has finished, all the Docker images are discarded. So this means that every pipeline is completely isolated. We created this plugin, and it only exists in our own pipeline. Another team might want to take our plugin, modify it, maybe make some changes which are not compliant to us, and their pipeline will just work, because when both pipelines will run at the same time, each one will deploy its own plugin. There will be no conflicts, no problems with versions and stuff like that. So it's a very powerful mechanism that makes plugin creation very easy, and I would say very error-free. Like you can easily create plugins and you don't have the fear anymore of breaking the stuff of another team. You create your own plugin, you use it in your pipeline. If you don't like it, you just simply discard it. The plugins also in the marketplace are versioned, so you can keep versions, old versions as well. So you can have one team use version 3 of your plugin and another team version 4. But that is not a requirement. You can do whatever you want. So Codefresh essentially solves the plugin hell problem that you might have seen in other platforms, both for developers who are, afraid to create plugins with the fear of breaking something. And usually what happens is they ask their operation team, hey, please install this plugin for me and check that it's compliant with all the other plugins. With Codefresh, you can create a plugin in minutes, and this is a live example of how you can do it.
Awesome. So, and like Kostas was mentioning, it really was simple for us to create these steps and to add additional functionality. So what that allows you to do is and now part of your CI/CD platform is part of your observability platform. And you could further understand what's going on when you do those code pushes. You could see them show up inside of your platform. You can see those deployment windows, and it's not really hard to do. You're not messing around, and by encapsulating inside of a plugin, you could repeat the step over and over again anytime you need to. With that, let me go back now and talk a little bit more about what it is that we've kind of learned, and one key point I want everybody to take away from this is observability means being able to answer any question you can have of your application and what is going on inside there, especially when you don't know the answer. It is about understanding the unknown unknowns. Everybody knows what CPU load is. Everybody understands what network performance might look like. But how is that different for your world when the requests are coming in and hopping across different services in ways that are not really understood up front? So it's important to capture all the data you can, not be worried about that carnality of that data, so you can find out what you don't even know what it is you're looking for, right? And with that, I think we could go ahead and take a couple questions. You're certainly, everybody is encouraged to sign up for a free trial. You go to honeycomb.io.sign up. Same thing with Codefresh. You could sign up for a free account with unlimited builds, or schedule one-on-one with any of the experts at codefresh.io. I do see a couple of questions here in the Q&A.
Yeah, there are some questions, and actually I think some of them are for both products. So the first question is, how do you take care of code security? It's not clear if he's asking about Codefresh or Honeycomb, so maybe we can answer for both. So answering for Codefresh, you can install Codefresh in multiple ways. You can use the cloud version where everything is hosted by us. There is also an on-premise version where everything is hosted by the customer. And there is also the hybrid version where the web UI is hosted by us, but the customer is getting the Codefresh runner, which is a small Kubernetes application. You install it on your cluster, and then you run builds locally on your own cluster, not on Codefresh premises. And this is a very popular solution for customers who are anxious about security, and they have very strict legal requirements regarding the code security. So if you use the runner, everything stays behind the firewall. Like the source code stays in your own cluster, and the only thing that is transferred to Codefresh are the build status and all the integrations, but the source code stays there. So if you're asking about this kind of security, you can do it with the Codefresh runner. If you're asking about code security like security vulnerabilities, Codefresh already has integration with several popular solutions like Aqua Security, Twistlock, Claire, and you saw how easy it is to create a plugin. So you can extend your pipeline and have a code security step inside the pipeline where you scan your code, or maybe you want to scan your Docker image, or both, and then get the results, security issues. And of course, you can stop the pipeline and say something like, if I have critical security issues, do not deploy this image into production. So if you're asking about this kind of code security, we have you covered that as well. Pierre, regarding code security and Honeycomb?
Sure, great. So that is a really good question. You don't actually send your code up to us, but you do send data from your code running inside the platform into Honeycomb. Your platform is secured. Only your team has access to it. Honeycomb does adhere to SOC 2 Type 2 compliance to ensure our platform is safe in those regards, and we put the proper safeguards in place. However, there are certain times where people say, my data cannot leave our premises, or we cannot risk anything. And for that, Honeycomb actually has a great solution for you known as secure tenancy. This case here, you run a proxy internally, which will encrypt every single piece of data. You have that encryption key. Honeycomb does not get it. The data gets encrypted, it gets sent up to Honeycomb, and it's stored in an encrypted form. We can't read any of the strings. We don't understand the strings. And the data is all encrypted for us. When you query that data and you pull it back down into your platform, it'll run right back through that same secure tenancy proxy where it gets decrypted before rendered into your browser. So it's a great technology. Honeycomb's got a patent on it, and we're really happy to share this with our customers. It helps us also achieve HIPAA compliance for those who have very stringent needs and security requirements for their applications.
Another question that I think is for Honeycomb is, can you talk more about the SDK that you use to instrument your code?
Yeah, so in my case here, I use the Jaeger SDK wrapper for open tracing. Wow, say that, mouthful. I just wanted to use a lot of open sourced solutions to instrument my code. But you're not limited to that. Honeycomb actually offers a great thing or a great line of SDKs we call B-lines, which automatically instrument everything for you and are really, really easy to use. Honeycomb is also part of the Open Telemetry Consortium, which is part of CNCF, a very popular project out there. And this is a way to standardize on instrumentation across the board for all platforms, for all vendors, for everybody. And Honeycomb, we are part of that. We do support it. Our SDKs work with it. And in fact, the data that you see in the entire demo, and in order for you to stand it up, you actually need to stand up an open telemetry collector. Again, just trying to use more open source parts and really showing that you can collect all these things together and we're compatible with all of them. So there is a few different options there, and to listen again, you have the Open Telemetry SDKs, which is a great way to go. They are vendor neutral. Honeycomb does offer its own SDKs known as B-lines, very powerful auto instrumentation, world-class set of SDKs and easy to use. And you could also use other open source SDKs. In my case, I used Jaeger with open tracing, and I piped that through an open telemetry frame or pipeline.
So two questions that are for Codefest is, how do you integrate with AWS EKS? And I think here you are using an EKS cluster or not? So maybe you can show the screen so we can answer the question live. In general, sure. Codefresh works with any compliant Kubernetes cluster. So if your cluster supports the Kubernetes API, it should work. You can actually run Codefresh on your own laptop. But as far as integration is concerned, if you go to account settings where people can see the settings, and then if you go to Kubernetes, so here is how you integrate clusters in Codefresh. You add them once centrally in your own account. So all the credentials are stored here. And then each cluster gets a unique name. So then when you create a pipeline, you don't have to care about credentials anymore. You just reference clusters by name. So this screen is normally only accessible to the administrator in your team. And then all developers can quickly create pipelines if they just know the name of the cluster. And this is the same way for all integrations. So if you have a Docker registry, you define the Docker registry once here centrally, and then inside the pipeline, you mention the Docker registry by name. And a related question to this is, how do you support multiple regions deployment at the same time? So this has many answers. You can simply create one pipeline that is using all your clusters in different regions. You can have different pipelines that are running on each region, or you can have a single pipeline where we have support parallel steps. So you can run some steps in parallel in your own pipeline. So you can say, I want to deploy to Europe and US and Asia at the same time. And every pipeline in Codefresh by default gets access to all Kubernetes cluster by name. So as long as you have connected your clusters to the different regions inside Codefresh, you can use them right away.
I'm seeing another question here about piggybacking on about access to data for specific users. In Honeycomb, you can segregate your data by teams. We do allow you to do that. And a user belongs to one or more teams. And that's a great way to segregate your data without understanding all your needs a little bit more deeper. But we do offer different ways to segregate data. There's data sets inside of teams as well. That's another level of abstraction we need.
Then another question for Codefest is, what are the costs of creating all these containers? So pipelines run in a dynamic manner. You know, if you don't run anything, no resources are consumed. Once you create the pipeline, all the Docker containers that are needed for this pipeline are launched. You can also create additional services inside the pipeline. So maybe you want to have some integration tests and you want a MySQL database installed at the same time. You can do this as well. If you use the cloud version of Codefresh, these resources come out of your available machines. So when you create a Codefresh account, you can choose what capacity you want to use. In the free version, you get, I think, one small machine, and then as you pay, you can add more machines. So it's only limited by what you pay in the cloud version. If you use the Codefresh runner, where you're running pipelines in your own premises, resources are handled by you, by the customer. So if you install the runner in a powerful cluster, you can use all the resources of that cluster, and you can split your resources to different clusters. You can even connect multiple clusters at the same time. The runner is just a standard Kubernetes application. So you know that the tools and the knowledge you have to monitor existing Kubernetes resources and existing applications, it's exactly the same way with Codefresh resources. So if you have a good way to monitor the resources that pipelines are consuming in your cluster, this is how you do it. Then there is another question: how easy it is to convert existing pipelines from Jenkins to Codefresh? Jenkins provides plugins. Does Codefresh provide plugin support? So we know that a lot of customers are using Jenkins. We actually have a migration guide. If you do a Google search here, migrate from Codefresh Jenkins integration, you will see the guide. It's a bit difficult, you know, to talk about all the specific cases, because there are customers that are using Jenkins 1, there are customers that are using, yeah, that's the second link. There are customers that are using Jenkins 2. So it depends on what the customer is doing. And also the plugins in Jenkins are different between versions. So Jenkins 1 is using Java-based plugins. Jenkins 2 is using shared libraries. So this migration guide gives you some hints and some guidance on how you can do it. And it covers the most usual cases where you have a pipeline that is checking out the code, creating a Docker image, and deploying to Kubernetes. So if you have this simple scenario, it's very easy to convert. For most complex cases, yeah, you can ask us how you do it. But the idea here is that in Jenkins, usually you have a very complicated pipeline, because as I said, the pipeline itself is handling all the credentials. So usually in the pipeline, in Jenkins, you manually run commands like Docker login, Docker push, Docker tag, while in Codefresh, as you saw, this is abstracted. The build step is very simple. You just connect your Docker registry once centrally, and then the build step is trivial. You say, I want this Docker file to be built, and I want to push it to this registry. So usually what happens is that if you migrate, your pipelines become much simpler and much more easy to understand and read. Regarding plugins, again, you know, Jenkins has a very huge library of plugins. So for some things that you might use, like Kubernetes deployment plugin, you don't need it in Codefresh, because Codefresh can deploy to Kubernetes natively. If you have another plugin, your best bet is to search Docker Hub and see if there is a Docker image that is having the same or similar functionality, and you can use it in a Codefresh pipeline like you saw. If you have a completely custom plugin, you know, Java code, then you need to create, either repackage it on a Docker image or make some modifications to make it easy to be packaged in a Docker image and used in a Codefresh pipeline. Codefresh works only with Docker images. That's the main idea. If you have a Docker image, you can use it in Codefresh. And if you package it in a Docker image, you can use it in Codefresh. There is another question for Codefresh. How do you restrict how do you restrict access to clusters in deploys? Example, I want an application deployed to a US cluster, but I don't want to accidentally deploy to an EU cluster. So in the enterprise version of Codefresh, you also get a feature that we call teams and permissions, which works with tags. Inside Codefresh, you're tagging your pipelines, your project, your cluster with tags. So you can tag like, this is my production cluster, this is my staging cluster, this is my QA cluster, and the same thing for pipelines and for projects. And then there is a powerful UI where an administrator can give specific rules and say, I want members of the developer team to not have access to production clusters, but to have access to staging clusters. And I want members of my DevOps team to have access to production clusters and stuff like this. And this not only works with clusters, but also works with pipelines. So you can restrict pipeline usage as well. You can even decide who can debug a pipeline, who can approve a pipeline. And it's very, let's say, flexible on what you do. But I want to be clear that this feature is only available to enterprise at the moment. So if you're using, the free account, you will not see this UI. You can do it. Also, I think it's important to mention that the integration screen that Pierre was showing, apart from native integration, you can also add a custom cluster. So even if there is a cluster that you host and it's compliant with the Kubernetes API, you can provide us with a service account. If you click on Add Provider, it's the custom providers. The fifth one, yep, that one. So here you give us a service account. So Codefresh has the exact same capabilities as the service account. So if you give a service account that is, let's say, available only to specific namespaces, then Codefresh can only work with those specific namespaces. And we give you also a guide on what are the ideal permissions that we need for the cluster. So if you want to deploy with Codefresh, you need some additional permissions, but of course, let's say somebody wants to have a read-only view in Codefresh for some reason, you can do this as well. So you can give to Codefresh only capabilities for read-only access to your namespaces or to specific namespaces. So here we essentially, use the native Kubernetes capabilities regarding security. So again, all your knowledge regarding Kubernetes security directly maps to Codefresh security. And I think that's it for questions. No, we have a lot more. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay,
going to go ahead and launch our poll real quick. So thank you everyone for answering our poll questions, but we'll keep rolling with the questions, or if you guys are open to it, Pierre and Kostas. We have about 6 more minutes on our schedule.
So I think there was one here about, oh boy, I'll let you capture them. I seen one here about caching images. Yes, there is an option to do that in Codefresh.
Yeah, for caching images, we are one of the few solutions. We offer a distributed Docker layer cache. So usually what happens with other CI solutions, if you have, let's say, 5 build nodes and you build a Docker image in the first node, and then next time you run the pipeline, for some reason, the third node is picking the build. This node doesn't have anything from the Docker layers. So your build will take the same time as the first build. In Codefresh, we have a distributed layer cache where all the nodes are equal. All of them have the same access to the Docker cache. So it doesn't really matter which node will pick your build. You don't need to care about this. So the second time that you run a build, all the Docker layers that are the same and we follow the same rules that a standard Docker build is following will be cached. So if you have created a proper Docker file where, on the top you have all the directives that don't change, stuff like apt-get update or downloads, and then at the bottom you have the source code copy. Every time you copy the source code or make a commit, only that particular Docker layer will change. We also have an even smarter Docker caching mechanism where Codefresh will check the hash ID of a Docker image. And if it finds that this exact image has been created before and it's already in the registry, because remember we have native Docker registry integration, then this build will be skipped completely. So we will not even build the image because we know it has been built again, which is a very good practice anyway. I mean, one of the good Docker practices is that you create your image once and then you deploy this image to different environments and you promote it from one environment to the next instead of building. So because we believe that this scenario is the best practice, we have taken a lot of measures to try and help people with Docker caching. And if you compare other solutions, there are other solutions where Docker caching is either something extra that you have to pay, it's something that is not supported, or you have to really write very strange configuration in order to gain this. With Codefresh, you get it out of the box. There is another question, if you have OpenShift integration. Yes, you can connect your OpenShift cluster right away. OpenShift is a compliant Kubernetes cluster, so you can use the custom provider. Maybe in the future we will add something more user-friendly, but you can do it. It will work right away. And we have customers that are running Codefresh with OpenShift.
I did want to put up, if anybody wanted to download the slides for the session, you can also find them at this link. It's my speaker page on Honeycomb. You can hold your phone up there and scan that. It should work. Get you right there. We are coming up to the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Yes, and thank you, Pierre, and thank you so much, Kostas. Thank you all, everyone who attended today, for all of your great questions. As a reminder, I'll also send you the slides via email, and then I've also added the link down there for Pierre's speaker page in our chat, and I will send you a copy of the recording tomorrow. So look out for that from me, Taryn at codefresh.io. Again, thank you so much, Pierre, for putting this presentation, and Kostas. You all have a great day, and thank you for joining us on Codefresh Live.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.